everybody, and welcome to the beginning of something that, to me, at least, is really exciting. And I hope it's equally exciting to you, and potentially even more so. Yeah? Contain yourself. Contain yourself, please. Anyway, this is the beginning of something that I'm calling the Galactic Lounge. And it's the beginning of a podcast for me. It's in a video format as well, which you'll be able to watch on YouTube. We may incorporate a little bit of the Vedic lunar scopes into the Galactic Lounge. I'm just kind of seeing how it goes and how I want to play with this and how I want to make it work. Just to give you an idea of the evolution of this, I started doing something last year, which was fun to me, called the Galactic Lounge Live. And we're probably going to do some of that here too, which involved me bringing people on to my channel and talking to them here on various topics about spirituality and consciousness, which gives me free license to talk about absolutely everything, because absolutely everything is spiritual on one level or another. And since we're all conscious, at least I hope so, then, then everything deals with consciousness as well. Some ideas that I have about this is I want to keep this in a little more of a loose format, a place where I can kind of come in and just let it all hang out, or within reasonable constraints, and just kind of freestyle and do things that are a little more freeform and a whole lot more fun. And I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Michael Reed, and I am a counseling astrologer working with the Vedic system of astrology and the developer of something that I like to call the empowered approach to Vedic astrology. If you're interested in experiencing this in action, you can do it through one of my Empower Hour consultations. If you're watching this video live, you'll see the link in the video above. If not, I'll put it in the text of the podcast for you to have access to as well. So something that I wanted to talk about in this first version of the Galactic Lounge are the lunar mansions, which we really call the Nakshatras. But so people have an idea of what Nakshatras actually are, they're also sometimes referred to as lunar mansions. And technically put, they are 27 equal divisions of the 360-degree sky that we look at with astrology, much like the way that the signs are 12 equal divisions of that 360 degrees. Now, some systems use 28 lunar mansions. That 28th lunar mansion is usually used more for things like electional astrology, which is picking a good day to do certain things. But most systems, in terms of interpretation, work with 27 of these divisions that are 13 degrees and 20 minutes each. And I wanted to talk a little bit today about my philosophy on the lunar mansions / nakshatras and how I incorporate them a lot in my work, because they're exceptionally powerful. And I often like explaining to people that the symbolism of the lunar mansions / nakshatras, we'll just say lunar mansions in this particular podcast today for the sake of simplicity. So these 27 lunar mansions, I like to tell my clients that they speak in symbolism that is very sharp and crisp. Now, what do I mean by that? I don't mean that it's like, a potato chip or, anything like that, obviously, or sharp like anything else. What I mean is when you begin to learn the language of the lunar mansions, what you'll find quite often is that their symbolism is very strongly and clearly represented in your day-to-day existence. I often use the analogy of once working with a client, and they were going through a period in their life where they were looking to potentially move house. And they were looking to move house because within the place that they lived, they were dealing with pipes that were leaking. Now, I tend to work with house cusps in my work with astrology, and house cusps can be in lunar mansions, much along the same way that the moon can be in a lunar mansion, and equally the planets can be in a lunar mansion. And I'll explain a little bit more about how lunar mansions work for you here in just a moment. But this person was going through an experience where they were looking to buy a new house because their pipes were leaking. So they were deciding if they should, buy a new house or whether they should just stay put where they were. And so they were consulting me looking into that. And their fourth house cusp, the house cusps deal with different areas of life. Houses in astrology deal with different areas of life. And the fourth house cusp especially deals with the concept of home. Equally, your environment and many other things on a similar level, right? In some ways, family is also connected to the fourth house. But we're focused specifically, rather than meandering off on multitudinous threads, let's keep it completely focused on the fourth house function as it is associated with home. So their fourth house cusp was in a section of the sky, a lunar mansion called Uttara Bhadrapada. Okay, Uttara Bhadrapada. So when they contacted me, I asked them, so what types of houses have you been looking at? And so they told me a little bit about a couple of places that they had been checking out. And one of those places was a restaurant on the ground floor, and there was a living space up above the restaurant. And they were telling me the reason that they weren't exceptionally interested in taking on that place was because if they were to do so, they would have been in a position where they had to open the restaurant up downstairs. And they said that they were initially thinking of doing so and opening up a juice bar. And there is a sutra or a bit of text that aptly describes Uttara Bhadrapada Nakshatra, and it contains the phrase pressing out juice from below. So here we're beginning to see a little bit of that sharp symbolism that's just presenting itself pretty amazingly. And so I said, okay, well, what was the other place that you looked at? And they said, well, the other place was a farmhouse that's by a river. And river is the place that's connected to Uttara Bhadrapada Nakshatra. So immediately I was seeing the symbolism of their fourth house cusp coming to life. And so, the way that I tend to, or I should say, one of the ways that I tend to work with the lunar mansions is to offer the person recommendations based upon those lunar mansions. So I don't believe in telling people what to do or telling people what not to do. I believe in supporting a person's choice so they're empowered in their decision-making process. And so I connected to them about this and I said, why don't you go check out that place by the river? Because I was sensing there was a stronger emotional attachment, which is another function of the fourth house. But there was a stronger emotional attachment to the place that was by the river. And so I made the suggestion that they go to check it out because I had a pretty strong feeling that doing so, because I understand how lunar mansions work, was going to help them in their decision-making process. And so they went and they took a look at it and they contacted me back and they said, you were right. I made my decision. And in my decision, I decided that I'm just going to stay here and fix the pipes in my house. Now, I know another part of that sutra or bit of text that's connected to Uttara Bhadrapada Nakshatra. And so I asked them, these pipes in your house that are leaking, are they by any chance up above your head? And the person replied with, yes. And how did you know? And that's because the sutra that's connected to Uttara Bhadrapada talks about sprinkling upon from above, right? And so the symbolism of this lunar mansion was speaking very strongly in this person's personal astrology. And even though I'm always inspired and find it deeply meaningful, I'm never surprised because it happens all of the time with the lunar mansions. And what I wanted to talk to you today about is why I feel that that happens. So we know that the planets, even if we only think of them as archetypes that are represented within our psyche, on a certain level, they're conscious because we're giving the concept of consciousness to them. In the philosophy which permeates Vedic astrology, the planets are spoken of as being incarnations of Vishnu. Now, Vishnu is the aspect of the divine that permeates the entire creation, right? Everything is ultimately Vishnu, right? So the planets are incarnations of Vishnu. They're considered incarnations of Vishnu. So they are aspects, or we can understand them on a more simplistic level, I should say. They are aspects of our psyche, our being, right? Because we're divine too, because we're Vishnu, that are representative of, different concepts within us, right? So for instance, like Jupiter is our spiritual understanding. It's the advisor in spiritual affairs, whereas Venus is the advisor in material affairs, how to lead a enjoyable life, right? So these are representative of different aspects of our being, right? And they are also considered in Vedic philosophy as incarnations of Vishnu. Now, signs in astrology are understood as the unconscious limbs of Vishnu as time personified, also known as Kala Purusha, right? Kala meaning time, Purusha can understand as as pure being, so to speak, right? So the signs are understood to be the unconscious limbs of Vishnu as time personified. So if we think about that, what's actually being said and what's interesting in that regard is the fact that the signs are always represented by living beings. Like we have Taurus the bull, Aries the ram, Gemini is the twins, so living beings. And the planets, as we were talking about, are connected with, deities or incarnations of Vishnu. So if we take that concept and we understand that the planets are incarnations of Vishnu and the signs are the unconscious limbs of Vishnu as time personified, that unconscious concept relates to the fact that living beings are not fully aware of their consciousness as Vishnu, right? They're not fully aware that they're Vishnu. So that's why they're unconscious limbs of Vishnu. They haven't awakened to that fact. So why am I going off on these two tangents about planets and signs? Well, because it's fun to do so, and I completely forgot what I was talking about. No, I'm only kidding. It's because I need to do that to give you an understanding of what the lunar mansions themselves are actually all about. Okay. And this may be, I'm going to try to keep it somewhat short, but this may be a little bit long-winded. I'm going to warn you just to give you an understanding. So each planet, as we were discussing, is connected to an incarnation of Vishnu. The moon is understood to be the incarnation of Vishnu known as Krishna. Okay. And so on another level, we're going to talk about the moon and some of the functions of the moon. And yes, in case you're wondering, other planets can be in lunar mansions too. It's not just the moon that we're concerned about and its lunar mansion, but the moon plays an important role in terms of the lunar mansions. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, aside from the fact that the moon's movement was observed over the course of a lunar month, moving through different lunar mansions, right? And so what are lunar mansions? They're associated with the fixed stars, right? The fixed stars of the constellations. And so we're dividing the sky in 27 equal divisions, right? And of course, constellations are not always a specific size. It's an approximation that we're working with when we're working with this. Okay, and so the moon's movement over the course of a lunar month used to be observed through these different lunar mansions. So let's talk a little bit about the moon. The moon is understood as being connected to our consciousness, or another term for that is manas, our sensory mind, how we perceive things, how we subjectively see things in our life, right? That's what the moon is responsible for in astrology. Ideally, the moon is meant to reflect the light of the sun. The sun is understood, amongst many other things, to be representative of the soul. So the moon's meant to reflect the light of the soul in our experience of consciousness. Sometimes it waxes in its capacity to do that, and sometimes it wanes in its capacity to do that, which doesn't mean if you have a waning moon in your chart that there's no hope for you. It doesn't really mean that. It just means that the moon waxes and wanes over the course of the month, and so too does our psyche. So understanding a little bit more about the moon. The moon is really powerful, right? And its gravitational pull, or the interaction between the Earth and the moon, is what causes the rise and fall of the tides. Keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. Okay, so we're going to take a little bit of a detour and talk about another deity in astrology, in Vedic astrology, known as Varuna. Okay, so Varuna was first understood in terms of I should give you a little bit of context, in terms of something called the Rig Veda, which is an ancient Vedic text. Varuna was first mentioned in those texts as being connected to the skies, right? He's mentioned as creating or placing, I should say, the stars in the firmament and splitting heaven and earth asunder. So first he's connected to the skies. Then he's connected to the waters. And then he's also connected to the concept of truth or cosmic justice. And so we kind of look at that and we go, well, which of these is he? He's also referred to on many levels as the king of the gods. And so from a simple perspective, we can look at that and we go, well, it seems like he changed throughout history, but the concept is that he didn't change. All those things are combined, and I'm going to kind of touch on that a little bit here. And yes, we're still dealing with astrology, I promise you. So, getting back onto that particular concept. So Varuna's connection to the stars. As I said, he put the stars in the sky and split heaven and earth asunder. So the lunar mansions / Nakshatras are the stars in the sky. Varuna is understood to have created the stars, the lunar mansions, okay, and split heaven and earth asunder. So he's also responsible for creating the concept of duality, or the understanding or the illusion, I should say, of our separation from the realization that we too are infinite divine beings, that we're a part of that infinite universe, that we too are vast, and we only see like a small percentage of that. Okay, sometimes if we're lucky. So Varuna is responsible for that. Varuna is also referred to as being connected to oceans. Okay, and we're gonna have an understanding of that. So what are oceans all about? That's related to the modulations that the mind goes through. The modulations that the mind goes through. There's another ancient text called the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, and one of the sutras within that text speaks of yoga or union, which is what yoga really means, as being the stopping of the mind waves. So Varuna is responsible for the creation of those mind waves. Now, Varuna is one of the adityas. So what are the adityas? The adityas are the children of Aditi, who's the boundless universal mother. So the adityas are understood, and there are some systems that attribute there being 7 adityas and some that attribute there being 12. So we're going to talk about the 12 system right now. So the adityas are 12 different versions of the sun turned into deities. Okay. Now, interestingly enough, in a text called the Bhagavad Gita, and many of you have probably heard of that, Krishna in that text speaks of himself as being, as amongst water creatures, he claims, I am Varuna. So he's the chief of the water creatures. And if we remember, we were saying Krishna is connected to the moon. But wait a second. So if Krishna is Varuna and Varuna is connected to the moon and Varuna is also connected to the sun, aha, you're seeing it. So Varuna is also on one level the connection between our soul and our consciousness. So why did I go into this big long-winded explanation? Okay, well, those lunar mansions or nakshatras that are placed in the sky, they operate as a communication system between your soul to your consciousness. That's pretty powerful, isn't it? So think back about that experience of the person buying a house. So on a certain level, your soul knows the direction that it needs to go in. Your consciousness gets confused about that direction because it waxes and wanes in its capacity to reflect the sun, right? So those lunar mansions or nakshatras are like your soul's instant messaging system to you here as an incarnated individual to give you an idea of where it wants you to go and explore. That's pretty powerful. At least I think that's exceptionally powerful. And so we have a messaging system that we can, use to communicate with our soul. We can work in reverse with that. We can use that very same symbolism when we know a planet's in a certain space or when a house cusp is in a certain space to communicate with that energy. That's really exceptional. I think that's really super exceptional. And it's a fundamental of the way that I work with astrology because the foundation of the empowered approach to Vedic astrology is based upon the lunar mansions, amongst many other things, but fundamentally the lunar mansions. So they're like messengers to our consciousness. When we get lost or when we get confused, you need to pay attention to that symbolism, and they're well worth learning. And I actually have a course. I'm going to point to a link above. You can connect to the first module of the course. I believe it's somewhere between, I've forgotten the price, I have to say. I'll be the first to say. It's somewhere between $29 and $39 if you want to connect to the first module of the course of learning the lunar mansions. You can find the link to that above. So when you learn that symbolism, it's like connecting to an information system, which helps you to rectify aspects of your life that, are perhaps feeling not quite so connected. Or put more simply, when things go wrong, and you're trying to get a little bit of clarity, they're really excellent to work with. So thank you for tuning in to this first episode of the Galactic Lounge. I'm glad that you listened. Thanks for allowing me to blab on endlessly. And that's why I started this, so I could just sit and blab on endlessly all day long. And I thank you for listening. And if you'd like to experience a little bit more of the empowered approach to Vedic astrology in action, again, you can schedule one of my Empower Hour consultations. You're going to find a link to those up above, and you can schedule using the discount code YT to give yourself a little bit of a discount. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'm really excited to start this new adventure with you. Bye now.